Once upon a time in a small, isolated village nestled between rugged mountains and dense forests, there was a woman named Ada. Unlike most women in her village, Ada was known for her remarkable strength and fierce demeanor. She was tall and broad-shouldered, with arms that could split wood as easily as most could snap a twig. Ada's life had been hard, but she bore her burdens without complaint, her strength and resilience becoming the stuff of legends. Ada had not always been the way she was. In her youth, she had been as timid as a doe, always shrinking from the rough men who dominated her world. Her father was a harsh man, who believed that a woman's place was in submission. He treated Ada and her mother with little respect, often resorting to his fists when words didn't satisfy his anger. Ada's mother was a frail woman who died young, leaving Ada alone with her tyrannical father. After her mother's death, something in Ada changed. She vowed never to be as weak and helpless as her mother had been. She began to train her body in secret, working long hours in the fields and lifting heavy stones until her muscles grew strong and hard. Her hands, once soft and delicate, became calloused and tough. Over time, Ada became a formidable figure, her strength rivaling that of the strongest men in the village. When her father attempted to strike her one evening, she caught his hand in midair. The shock on his face was priceless, but it was nothing compared to the horror that followed. Ada didn't just stop his blow, she twisted his arm until he fell to his knees, crying out in pain. From that day on, Ada's father never raised a hand against her again. He lived the rest of his days in fear of his own daughter, who had grown into something far more powerful than he could ever have imagined. Word of Ada's strength spread through the village like wildfire. At first, people were afraid of her, especially the men who had once dismissed her as nothing more than a mere woman. But as time passed, they began to respect her. Ada was not a bully, and she did not use her strength to harm the innocent. However, if she saw a man mistreating a woman or child, she did not hesitate to step in. Her reputation grew, and soon, she was known as Ada the man-beater. Despite her fearsome reputation, Ada was not unkind. She helped those in need, often assisting widows and orphans, and she was always the first to lend a hand during the harvest. The villagers came to see her as a protector, someone who could stand up to the bullies and abusers who had long plagued the community. One day, a stranger arrived in the village. He was a tall man, with a lean build and a sharp, cunning look in his eyes. He went by the name of Marcus, and he was a traveler who claimed to have seen many wonders in distant lands. The villagers were wary of him, but they were also curious. He had a silver tongue and could tell stories that captivated even the most skeptical listeners. Marcus soon learned of Ada's reputation and took it upon himself to challenge her. He believed that no woman, no matter how strong, could best a man in a fight. His arrogance was matched only by his ignorance, and he openly mocked Ada in the village square, declaring that he would put her in her place. Ada, who had never sought out fights, could not ignore the challenge. She knew that if she did not face Marcus, it would embolden others to test her as well. And so, she accepted his challenge, much to the excitement and trepidation of the villagers. The fight was scheduled for the next day at dawn, on the flat ground near the river. The entire village gathered to watch, whispering among themselves and placing bets on the outcome. Marcus stood confidently, a smirk on his face, while Ada remained calm and composed, her expression unreadable. When the fight began, it was clear that Marcus had underestimated Ada. He was fast, but she was faster. He was strong, but she was stronger. Every move he made, she countered with ease, her blows landing with precision and power. The fight did not last long. Within minutes, Marcus was on the ground, dazed and bloodied. Ada stood over him, not with triumph, but with a quiet dignity. "I do not fight for sport," she said, her voice carrying over the silent crowd. "I fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. If you have learned anything today, let it be that strength is not just in the body, but in the heart." Marcus, humiliated and defeated, left the village the next day. The villagers never saw him again, and they were grateful for it. Ada's victory only solidified her status as a legend in the village. From that day on, no man dared to challenge her, and the village became a safer, more peaceful place. Ada lived out her days in the village, respected and loved by those who knew her. She never married, but she was never lonely, for she had the companionship of those she had helped and protected over the years. When she finally passed away, the villagers mourned her deeply. They erected a statue in her honor, a tribute to the woman who had been their guardian and protector. And so, the legend of Ada the man-beater lived on, passed down through generations as a story of strength, courage, and the power of a woman who refused to be beaten down by the world. Years had passed since Ada's legendary victory over Marcus, and the village had known peace and stability ever since. Ada had become somewhat of a mythic figure, her name spoken with reverence. But as is often the case with legends, there are those who seek to test the strength of their subjects, to see if the stories hold true. One summer day, a new stranger came to the village. He was not like any man the villagers had seen before. Towering over even the tallest of men, his muscles bulged beneath his rough, travel-worn clothes. His skin was bronzed from the sun, and a thick beard covered his face, giving him the appearance of a wild, untamed beast. His name was Goran, and he was a man of few words, but the intensity in his eyes spoke volumes. Goran had traveled far and wide, earning a reputation as a warrior unmatched in strength. He had heard whispers of Ada the man-beater during his travels, and was intrigued by the tales of a woman who had bested so many men. His curiosity quickly turned into a desire to test his own strength against hers. As Goran walked into the village, the townspeople watched him with a mix of fear and curiosity. He was clearly no ordinary man, and many of them whispered that he could be trouble. When Goran learned that Ada was still alive and living in the village, he immediately sought her out. He found Ada in the fields, helping an elderly couple repair their broken fence. Despite the passage of time, Ada remained as strong and capable as ever, though the streaks of gray in her hair hinted at her advancing years. Goran approached her without preamble, his booming voice startling the birds from the trees. "You are Ada the man-beater," Goran declared, his tone both respectful and challenging. Ada looked up from her work, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the giant before her. "I am Ada," she replied calmly. "And you are?" "I am Goran," he answered. "I have heard tales of your strength, and I wish to see for myself if you are as powerful as they say." Ada straightened, wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. She had faced many challengers in her time, but something about Goran gave her pause. He was unlike any man she had ever encountered, and there was an intensity in his gaze that set her on edge. "I do not fight for the sake of fighting," Ada said, her voice steady. "If you seek to prove yourself, there are other ways." Goran shook his head. "There is no other way. I must know if you are truly as strong as the legends say." The villagers, who had begun to gather around them, murmured anxiously. They knew Ada's strength, but Goran was an unknown quantity, and his sheer size was intimidating. Ada, however, could not refuse the challenge. She knew that if she backed down, it would undermine everything she had stood for all these years. The fight was arranged for later that day, in the same clearing by the river where Ada had once defeated Marcus. The villagers gathered in tense anticipation, many of them secretly fearing the outcome. Goran was a mountain of a man, and while they had faith in Ada, they knew that this fight would be unlike any she had faced before. When the time came, Ada and Goran faced each other in the clearing. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. Ada's expression was calm, but there was a steely resolve in her eyes. Goran, on the other hand, looked eager, his massive fists clenched at his sides. The fight began, and it was immediately clear that Goran was as strong as he looked. His punches were like sledgehammers, each one sending shockwaves through the ground. Ada fought with all the skill and strength she had, but Goran's sheer power was overwhelming. Every time she landed a blow, Goran barely flinched, while his strikes sent her staggering. The villagers watched in horror as the battle unfolded. Ada, who had always been the unshakable pillar of their community, was being pushed to her limits. Goran was relentless, his attacks coming faster and harder with each passing moment. Ada fought back with everything she had, but it was clear that she was struggling. Then, with a final, devastating blow, Goran struck Ada squarely in the chest. The force of the impact sent her flying backwards, crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. The villagers gasped in unison, their hearts sinking as they saw Ada lying motionless in the dirt. Goran stood over her, breathing heavily, his expression unreadable. He had won, but there was no joy in his victory. The villagers rushed forward, gathering around Ada, their faces pale with fear. Ada, their protector and hero, was hurt, perhaps even fatally so. They quickly carried Ada to the village healer, a woman named Miriam who had tended to the villagers' wounds for decades. Miriam worked tirelessly to stabilize Ada, but it was clear that her injuries were severe. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, Ada was in a critical condition, and there was no telling if she would survive. For days, Ada remained unconscious, her body battered and bruised. The village was shrouded in a heavy silence, the usual sounds of life replaced by the anxious whispers of the villagers. Goran had disappeared after the fight, leaving behind only questions and a sense of foreboding. As Ada lay in the healer's hut, fighting for her life, the villagers realized just how much they had relied on her strength and protection. Without Ada, they felt vulnerable, and the fear that had once been kept at bay by her presence began to creep back into their lives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ada stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around weakly, her vision blurry. Miriam was by her side in an instant, relief flooding her features. "Ada, you're awake," Miriam whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Ada tried to speak, but her throat was dry, and her body ached with every breath. She managed a faint nod, her eyes filled with pain and determination. She had been beaten, but she was not broken. The villagers, upon hearing the news, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Their hero had survived, though she was not the same as before. It took weeks for Ada to recover, and even then, she was not the woman she once was. Her injuries had taken their toll, and though she regained much of her strength, she knew she would never be as strong as she had been. The villagers, however, did not love her any less. If anything, their respect for her grew, for they saw the courage it took to face a foe as mighty as Goran and to survive. As for Goran, he never returned to the village. Some said he continued his travels, seeking out other challenges, while others believed that he had been humbled by the fight and chose to disappear into obscurity. But wherever he went, the memory of the battle with Ada would stay with him forever. Ada's defeat marked a turning point for the village. They realized that even the strongest among them were not invincible, and they began to take more responsibility for their own protection. They trained, they grew stronger, and they worked together to ensure that their village would never again be at the mercy of a single individual. Ada, though no longer the invincible figure she once was, remained a beloved leader in the village. She had faced her greatest challenge and lived to tell the tale, and in doing so, she had shown the villagers that true strength lay not just in the body, but in the spirit. And so, the legend of Ada the man-beater lived on, not as a tale of invincibility, but as a story of resilience, courage, and the enduring power of the human spirit.